If you look at how ideas spread, it's usually assumed that they're going to start in the core and then spread to the periphery. Or like, if you follow modernization theory, this would be like from the global north to the global south. So I think that my research basically starts from a calling into question of an assumption that has dominated a lot of the fields that I engage with, which is that influence always or necessarily flows from the sort of like majority population to the minority populations. This means that the assumption is usually that the migrants will assimilate to become more like the majority. And so basically this leaves very little room for like the reverse happening, no? Like the host populations learning from the migrants. In my thesis, I sort of ask whether the opposite is also possible. And I look specifically at political behaviors and ideas. And this is because, well, there's been a bit of research on like, you know, how host populations adopt, for example, language practices or like foods or, you know, entertainment. There's been much less on political ideas and behaviors, and this is because these are aspects that are usually considered quite sticky, like quite resistant to change. So I want to see whether it holds also in this context. When I was in my undergrad, there was a mural that was uncovered while they were doing refurbishments in the canteen of the university. And it was a mural that had been painted by refugees who were fleeing the dictatorship in Chile, so in the 1970s, more or less. And they wanted to renovate the mural, like preserve it, basically, but they didn't have funds for it. And so they organized all these events where they invited like members of the Chilean community to give talks about their experiences, like basically, yeah, Chilean political history, their experiences of exile, etc. And I remember attending these events, and like, although I kind of knew what had happened in Chile, I think it sort of transformed my general interest into a kind of deeper fascination with Chilean history. In the first paper of my PhD, I studied the transnational diffusion of a protest performance, so it's a bit like a flash mob, if you want, against gender-based violence, originated in Chile during the 2019 uprisings. And it's quite particular because it's really embedded in the Chilean context. And so I take this kind of as a departure point to ask, like, how come this very locally embedded protest spread to over 60 countries within a few weeks? And I use this to kind of like understand what this can tell us about how political behavior spread more broadly. And basically I combine protest event data, so I kind of like built a data set where I tracked all the instances of the protests, which I was able to do because when women were doing performances, they were systematically recording them and then uploading them online with a hashtag. So I built this data set of like where the protest happens, when it happens, who organizes it, how much it's similar to the original. And then I combined this with survey data on Chileans abroad, where Chileans were basically asked about their social networks, like how many, like basically the density of ties that they have with local populations. And through this, I showed that the way in which the Anthem spread was not random. Like it was able to spread in this way because the Chilean diaspora has a certain network structure that is conducive to the diffusion of ideas and behaviors into host societies. And so the sort of like key takeaway is that historical immigration patterns create these sort of like latent infrastructures for diffusion from like a given home country into host societies through the migrants, who act as bridges, if you want. And if this holds for like this particular protest performance, like my assumption is then that it should also hold for other things. One of my goals is to kind of contribute to portraying migration in a positive way and kind of like, you know, emphasize the positive, the beneficial effects of migrations on receiving countries. And this is partly because migration is very often framed as a threat, like not only in political debates, like we've seen with the rise of the far right, etc., but also in research. Like I found that a lot of the research that looks at the effects of migration on host societies looks at like whether it makes people vote more for the far right or whether it makes people, I don't know, more racist, more supportive of exclusionary policies. And so like we kind of overlook these like beneficial effects, no? Like we overlook how migration can lead to the cross-pollination of ideas that can sort of like lead to innovations in political behaviors and attitudes. I'm also motivated by like sort of like shining light on the fact that learning processes are not necessarily unidirectional. That's like you know, like I think we all know that like migrants can bring positive things to the host societies, but like it's often something that is, I've found it a bit underemphasized in research, and like I didn't feel that this corresponded with my personal experience, for example, no? Because I don't know, I grew up having a lot of friends from everywhere, and I think this kind of shaped me a lot as a person. And yeah, I thought this was a bit overlooked when we study migration and its impact on host societies, like this sort of like, yeah, positive aspect of it. And I just wanted to show that, yeah, if people mix and like exchange ideas, like these exchanges go in both ways, no? And it's not like just one part of the population that learns, it's both.